Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Mindfuel, where we are helping amateur endurance athletes train their brains as consciously as they train their bodies. Joining us today is Mark Sinclair, a former UK national and international 1500 meter and 3000 steeplechase runner, a keen cyclist, a sports biomechanics expert, and a sports branding entrepreneur. We were introduced by a mutual friend, and Mark has become a great supporter of Mindfuel and its development. So it's very exciting to have him here today to talk to us a little bit more about self-perception and specifically evolving the meaning of sport in one's life during different seasons. So Mark, welcome to Mindfuel.
Great to be here. It's a really interesting project and journey that you're on now, and I'm feeling honored to be part of it. Thank you for asking me.
Well, thank you for your support because you've been an incredible sounding board.
That's great.
So, Mark, as you may know, we like to start every episode of Mindfuel asking our guests who they are, not what they do. So, if I had to rephrase that, maybe how would your wife describe you?
Well, apart from a pain in the rear, you mean? I'm Mark Sinclair. I am someone who lives for being able to exercise, to do workouts. And ever since I was a kid, I was always running around, timing myself. If it wasn't on the bike, timing myself around laps around where I lived. When I grew up, it was timing myself running across a field, or I just ever since I was a small child, being interested in sport and running, football, cycling in particular. And I've been lucky enough to make my undergrad and postgrad studies related to sport, and also spend, until very recently, a lifetime working in the world of sport. So,
So,
yes.
let's dig into that a bit more. Your identity, which we will touch on later, has in many ways revolved around sport, and you've had quite an illustrious career as a runner, as we spoke about, but yeah, through some other endeavors in sport, shall we say. So, yeah, walk us through that in a bit more detail.
Well, as a much younger man, I was a decent level club runner, and I reached a point where I was able to compete for England 3As, which is kind of a sort of borderline international standard. My best result was a sixth place in the UK 3000 steeplechase final in 1986. So I was at an okay level, but I was, I'd got to a point where I was breaking through, and unfortunately, I came down with ME at the time after a stint of training in Australia, and that pretty much ended my competitive
Can you
career.
explain what that is?
It's a post-viral state where I can't even pronounce the full term. It's an immune problem where everything just starts to break down. Your glands are constantly swollen. You're constantly fatigued. And just the slightest bit of exercise, or even just walking, or even studying or working, just becomes a real problem. And so I went through that probably for about 3 or 4 years. When I had to stop competing, I actually chose to go to university then. That was age 25. So I struggled with it through university a little bit, but gradually it disappeared. And in a way, I utilized my studies in going into a working career quite nicely. And I don't suppose I would change it. I would like to have run a bit quicker, and I was going in that
Always.
direction. But yeah, I was a decent level. I had people in my training group who were far better than me. One of my training partners, lad called John Gladwin. He was ranked fourth in the world over 1500 meters, Commonwealth silver medalist. And so it was a really strong training group. So it was great. I really had a fantastic time.
It's such a special time of life, I think, for many of us who have ever competed, even if it's an individual sport, but as part of a team or a group, we often find our best friends there because they can understand a big part of who we are, what drives us in a way that some outside of sport never can quite grasp. So it's nice to hear that you're still like lifelong friends with some of
Yeah.
the guys.
Yeah, I'm still lifelong friends with a big chunk of the people that I used to run with. And if we don't meet up, then we chat on Strava. We like each other's exercise. And yeah, the vast majority of my friends now are
Mm.
ex-athletes, and they're all falling apart like me. They've all got,
Well,
they've
we'll
all
come
got
on to
problems.
that, but I want to stay focused a little bit on some of your earlier days in your sporting career
Yeah.
when you were training and competing at such a high level. Where else did you find meaning in your life, or was it primarily through sport?
I loved art, but unfortunately,
Mhm.
I kind of fell out of love with art eventually, just because I just didn't have the time. And I love to
Wow.
draw, and that's a plan for retirement, to get back into it. But so I love my art, but I had a real passion for sports, and I have a love of guitar, which I again don't really get much time to play. So between sport and music has been my passion, but my two passions in life. But I had one friend who lived with me at my parents' house for a while. Now lives in the USA, runs a very well-known running store down in Colorado Springs. He stayed
Nice.
at my parents for about a year, and we would train together. And he just always used to take the mickey out of the fact that when I finished my run or before I run, I used to just stare at my running shoes, and I would kind of look at the wear pattern on the outsole. And he used to just do these impressions of me sat on the end of the bed staring at running shoes. And that was before I went back into higher education, and I ended up having a real passion for biomechanics. And my
Mm.
undergrad and postgrad studies were all about running shoe design. And I ended up in a job with Nike, in a job that involved running shoe design or track spike design in particular. So I guess I had that passion for running shoes from an early age. I just love running shoes. I just think they're fantastic things.
It's fun. We always tend to show my mom will also tell me now that I'm older, "Oh, yeah, you were like this as a kid," or "I saw that when you were a kid."
Yeah.
These things shine through our personalities over time, and they might come to fruition in a slightly different way, but that's really funny about the shoes. Almost your meditative place, just staring at the bottom
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
your shoes.
Yeah. It's slightly ironic that the guy that used to take the mickey out of me for doing that now runs a running shoe store.
That is so true. So,
But
so true.
yeah, but
And so what was that transition out of competition like for you? Your hand was forced, so I suppose it
yeah,
was not so much your decision, but what was easy and what was hard about that?
it was hard in a way because I actually got a place at university based on my sporting achievements, on my running
Mm.
achievements. And so I think in that sense, although I did well academically in the end, I think they were quite disappointed by the fact that I turned up ill with a post-viral condition and barely ever competed for the university the entire time I was there. But and all those around me were great level athletes. My housemates were all great athletes, but so it was quite difficult. But I just threw myself into my studies and beers and things like that. So to your question, I didn't really struggle at the time because I had a way of substituting, and I really got into the running shoe element of it through my studies and was able to, I studied things surrounding exercise physiology and biomechanics, but I was still able to jump on the treadmill every now and again and be a lab rat for people doing their PhDs and undergrad studies and things like that. So constantly running on a treadmill with various things plugged into me and cannulas and blood spurting around all over the place because you're doing a 10 mile on a treadmill and having your blood taken every 5 minutes, things like that. I used to love doing that, just getting on a treadmill and doing a test and running yourself to max,
Wow.
seeing how long you could keep your heart rate above 200, things like that. So, yeah, I didn't struggle with that sense. It was much later in life, I think, that I've struggled, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, yeah, we will come to that. And before we do, the kind of generation of runners and competitive athletes that you were part of pre and during university was
Yeah.
not one that maybe had the awareness or emphasis on some of the mental side of sport that I think is becoming much more common today. So, was
Mm.
that something that you gave much thought to, intentionally trained, or do you think you just kind of came by it naturally to have the fortitude that was needed to compete at that level?
I was just very competitive, just highly competitive, and everything that I did became competitive. It was always that way, so it didn't matter whether it was just a game of cards or a race going for a run or driving somewhere. If I was driving somewhere, I would always have to try and get there as fast as I possibly could. It was crazy. Everything was on the clock. So yeah, I was just highly competitive, and as part of the undergrad studies, we did study sports psychology, so I did get a little bit of an insight into sports psych.
Mm.
So it was something that was quite interesting to me, and my studies were around running shoe design in relation to sports injury, running specific injury. So there is a link there. And then later in life, in my career, I was working with athletes whose careers would come to an end due to injuries. So I always find that area quite fascinating.
Mm. Yeah, so let's dive into that a bit more because in recent years more health challenges have come up for you that continue to evolve the way that you can train and also work. So, would you be open to sharing
Yeah.
more about that journey?
Sure, sure, yeah. I'm 64 years old. I still train pretty much every day in various things, but these days it all tends to be aimed at heart health. because relatively recently I got diagnosed with severe heart disease, which is not surprising given the last sort of 30 years of work with a lot of travel, a lot of air travel, a lot of eating badly, a lot of late nights. In the office, being an entrepreneur for the last sort of 5 years, you're putting some really, really long hours in, but you don't really think of the health trade-offs that come with that. And I hadn't realized that I was doing a lot of wrong things. So a lot of years of training really hard, not sleeping so well, late nights in the office, not eating particularly well, probably too many beers. That has all contributed to heart disease, which you don't know you've got until it's relatively late, until you get a symptom. So I was out running and got a lot of quite severe heart pain and arm pain, and ended up finding out that I had a 70% blockage. They call it the Widowmaker, the LAD. So, and that just really, really knocked me for six. So I've had to make quite a severe, significant, rather, change in my lifestyle to try and manage that, involving retirement and stepping back from the corporate life, and stepping back from businesses I helped create, and all the things that I should have been doing for years, trying to make sure that I'm not going anywhere just yet. So, and that has probably had the most profound effect on my mental state, because when you're really into your sport defines you. I became a person that was measured by my achievements on the track, I suppose, and amongst my peers, my friends. Those stats are always in there. Those times are always in the magazines. You're in the ranking lists, and so you can always sort of quote those and your achievements in life, in the career that I took working with some of the sports brands and some of the athletes that I worked with. I was very lucky enough to work with many, many, many world champions, Olympic champions. Those achievements in work were fair substitutes for my own career. I was living vicariously through others and their achievements, and being able to help them, with their footwear or with their apparel, and do things which help them achieve the heights that they were trying to achieve, to gain those extra watts, those extra seconds. So it was an interesting substitute, and one that I was passionate about. So not being able to train and compete at a high level anymore because of the illness and also arthritic knees, which is what made me turn to cycling, was not an issue. But the biggest issue was being diagnosed with the heart health. And luckily they've said, no, you're safe to exercise, but only up to a certain level. So I've been able to manage that, and I can still do things which challenge me a little from a sports point of view. But I have to eat really sensibly. I don't drink anymore. I don't eat carbs. This one has really forced me to change my whole outlook on life, and to try and come to terms with it. And you get a real sense of mortality when you get diagnosis like that. So that's what you're dealing with. And I've got a wife and a stepdaughter, and you want to be around for them. And yeah, I have sought help through reading, through podcasts, and one of the reasons why I've been so interested in Mindfuel, because there is stuff online that you can find, but I haven't really found much in terms of people who are really, really into their sports and then get heart disease. That doesn't really seem to be out there. When I say I retired from the corporate world, which I did, and the businesses that I helped create, I didn't stop working. I've taken up gardening, and I now do paid gardening work, which I love.
It's
It's brilliant.
fantastic.
It's physical. It's tangible, and you don't take it home with you. You don't ruminate over it. You don't stress over it. You don't lie in bed worrying about the next day. You actually really look forward to the next day. And I think that's great for your health if you can be in a situation where you look forward to the next day. I honestly haven't had that feeling in many, many years. The gardening work has been a great way of dealing with the mental side of it. And it gives you so much time to listen to podcasts.
Mm.
So my wife is now absolutely sick and tired of me coming home and telling her about the podcasts I've been listening to, and sending her the links to the podcasts so that she can listen to them.
So I want to have a serious response to all of that because you've shared so vulnerably and openly, and thank you. But before I go back to that, what's your top podcast recommendation?
Wow. I love Peter Attia
Yes, drive.
and Andrew Huberman.
You're
Uh,
still in the sports medical body
yes.
world.
Yeah. And they're fascinating. The other one is Diary of a CEO. I really love.
Ah,
I really
yes,
love those.
classic.
Yeah, I really enjoy that.
Nice. All good ones. All very learning focused for you. I can
Yeah, they're all
understand
learning
and self.
focused.
I guess going back to some of the points you made, and like I said, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm also very sorry about your diagnosis, but so
Mm.
inspired by how pragmatically you've handled it and how you've navigated to find other passions to fulfill some of what you needed from a work perspective, an identity, a movement perspective. And if anyone is listening and also is struggling with this or knows someone who is, I think to Mark's point, it's not such a talked about topic. So if we can help at Mindfuel connect folks, would really love to do that. Or if you know of any resources where fellow heart disease sufferers who are athletes and want to continue training are, maybe that would be useful for us to share within the community. But I think another thing that really strikes me and I think would resonate with quite a lot of our audience is what you described about making decisions earlier in your life that you didn't necessarily realize might have this sort of adverse impact or
Yeah.
how they were compounding. And I think that's something we do talk quite a lot about on Mindfuel is this topic of stress management and that
Yes.
while mentally we compartmentalize stress, oh, that was my physical stress, that was my training today. Now I have my work stress. Now I have the parent stress or the relationship stress.
Yes.
Our bodies only know stress as stress. And some of the adverse physical health things that can come up as a result, whether that's heart, gut, others, a lot live in that root of we just are putting a lot of stress on our
Yeah.
bodies. And even they're talking about the benefits of podcasts. There's also a lot of talk about now, so few of us, I'm guilty of this too, ever have quiet moments. If we're just
Yeah.
walking to the shop, we were plugged in and we're listening to a podcast, and our
Yes.
brains are taking in so much all the time. That's also stressful. So if you were, talking to an audience who is in their 20s, 30s, maybe 40s, what kind of advice or looking back, how might you think about some of the decisions that you made differently? And I don't want to dwell on, it's not regret, it's just more a
Mhm.
teaching moment, I suppose,
Yeah.
for folks who might be in a similar pattern as you were.
Yeah. It's funny because, as you say, we have access to so much information. And if I was in my 20s and had access to all this information now, the effect it would have had on my athletics career would have been profound. I would have, without doubt, run significantly faster. But in terms of the stress thing, I mean, stress is good for you. We need stress, but what you don't need in your life is long-term stress, and you don't need burnout. And having that in your life is something that, if I could give anyone a tip, if you're in a job and you're working long hours and you've got a boss that you don't like and you're struggling from day to day and you just don't feel like you have the agency to deal with the amount of work that you have on your plate, and you're ruminating about various things and you're struggling to sleep at night because you're worrying about what's left to do on the to-do list, that's a really bad place to be. And although sport can play a big part in you mitigating the effects that come with that level of stress, that chronic stress, you can't outrun or outtrain things like heart disease or inflammation or mental health. It's really important to ensure that you enjoy life. And although I got sucked into a career which, for big chunks of it, I was really passionate about, and I had some incredible moments, I wouldn't change those. But I had times when I was burnt out. Anyone that gets close to that or even near that I would say, just make some changes, because it's going to get you down the line. When you're younger, you think, oh, well, I'll deal with that then. But, I'm here now and I'm dealing with it. And I think if anyone has had a few years of chronic stress in their work life, I would really seriously tell them to go and have an angiogram, because that is probably the best £1,000 you'll ever spend. So yeah, I'd say just enjoy life and just don't get into a level of chronic stress where you've got inflammation. Blood pressure for me was always quite high, and I always sort of thought that high blood pressure was something that was a result of the workload and the chronic stress. What I didn't realize until becoming a bit of a podcast addict is that the high blood pressure is the cause of the heart
Wow.
disease. If you've got high blood pressure, relatively high blood pressure, or the doctor says you've got hypertension, you need to take the foot off the pedal. So I've had 20 years of high blood pressure thinking that's just a result of working too hard and probably not sleeping that well. What I didn't realize, what damage that was actually causing.
Important
No,
advice.
don't drink hard. Play hard, but don't drink hard.
Yeah.
One
Thank
of
you,
the great
Mark.
mistakes that you could possibly
Thank you so much for being so, as I said earlier, open and vulnerable and sharing your story and your wisdom with us today. I think you've left us with some really thought provoking advice. And it's hard in the world that we live in, I think, to keep some of those stress levels low. So it's really something I think many of us, particularly who are into our sports, tend to be kind of go getters in all areas. And so tempering
Mm.
that a bit and making sure that thinking about our health holistically is critically important. So
Sport is a really important part of aging. You know, I suppose the direction I'd want to take this is that if you're passionate about your sport and you've been a lifetime endurance athlete or sprinter or power athlete, you want to be able to do those things until late in life, right? You want to be able to do it into your 60s like me, or 70s, or even 80s. But you have to be able to make the choices when you're in your 20s and 30s if you want to be able to do those things. If you want to have a sports career or be playing sports into your 60s and 70s, then you need to be making the right choices in your 20s and 30s. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to carry on doing the things that you love doing. And like I said earlier, the sport defines people who are passionate about sport. Their whole being is defined by their participation in sport or their passion for sport. And if suddenly you can't do those things, it's devastating.
it
So
is.
make the right decisions when you're younger to ensure that you can still take part, even if it's just doing a park run or riding your bike to the coffee shop. You know, some of those things, if you don't look after yourself, you're not going to be able to do them. It's still life changing if suddenly sport is taken away from you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mark, thank you. I have a feeling some people might want to continue this
Oh,
conversation. So
okay.
we will put your contact details
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
our website and also
Yeah.
in the show notes for today, and they can reach out to you. And if you do have any follow up questions or comments or want this topic to be covered in more detail on Mindfuel, do get in touch with us either in the comments or at connect at mindfuel. Mark,
Thank you.
thanks again.
So I really hope what this has resonated with some of your followers and listeners. I hope
I'm sure it will, and maybe we'll have to have you back in another year and check in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks, Laura. It's been
Cheers,
great
Mark.
talking to you. Thank you very much.
Likewise.
Thank
Happy and
you.
healthy training to all of you. See you next time.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye-bye.